Hello, everybody. We are going to talk the anesthesia machine. And I know a lot of you are like, this machine is freaking complicated. I don't understand it. How am I going to use it? What am I going to do if I'm like alone in an office? Oh my God. And then boards, there's like all this nitty gritty stuff. It's a lot, right? So I am going to break down the anesthesia machine for you today. And if you listen to any of my teaching or any of my coaching programs, I always take big picture. We look at the big picture and we break it down in easy, bite-sized, understandable little chunks. Okay. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break it down from like a big bird's eye view. We're going to look at some of the board stuff. And then I'm also talking about some practical stuff with the machine using it every day. And you're going to walk away from this video feeling pretty damn good about the anesthesia machine. Okay. Now, again, every machine is different. There are from the old dinosaur narcomeds to the fancy draggers, the Apollos, so many different machines out there. But the premise of the machines are essentially the same. Okay. And once you understand what we're going to talk about today, all the machines are kind of going to make sense. And yes, I love the ones that you just turn on and you push a button and the whole thing is checked for you. Freaking awesome. Right. But we still have to understand our machine, especially knowing how to troubleshoot it. Okay. And I did do a couple troubleshooting videos. So I will try to like link them or find those so you guys can have those all in one place. Okay. Okay. So anesthesia machine, I cannot speak. Anesthesia machine is, I want you to think about it in two parts. I want you to think about what is it that it's doing, right? What does it do? And I always use the mnemonic SPDD, SPUD, right? SPDD. It supplies, it processes, it delivers, and it disposes of. I'll go through each one of those. Okay. And then you also want to think of it in terms of pressure. High, forgot to write intermediate. High, then there's the intermediate pressure, and then we have the low pressure. Okay. So that is how I want you to think about the anesthesia machine in these two parts. What does it do? And what pressure system is it using? First one is supply. We're going to talk about supply. And the supply portion uses both the high, intermediate, and the low pressure systems that I will go over. And I know my pictures are so lovely. Okay. Definitely not an artist. Okay. So essentially, your machine is supplying oxygen, air, nitrous oxide. Not all places will have all three of those. Every place should have oxygen because that's crazy, but they might not have all three of those. Okay. But it's essentially supplying oxygen, air, nitrous oxide, and then the gases to your patients. Okay. So they can go to sleep for their surgery. And they do that. They are supplied by, these are your cylinders. Usually have sorry, not cylinders. These are your pipelines. You have pipelines usually piped in from the hospital somewhere, but piped in through these pipelines, they'll be like blue, yellow, and green, usually oxygen, air, and nitrous, and those will be connected into your machine. Okay. So that's like the first thing is checking your, as I always say, start in the back. When you walk in that room, walk to the back of that machine, check your pipeline pressures, okay? Because you need your pipeline for your cases. So check the pipelines, make sure there's a place where they connect like together, like up in the air where they're hanging, and then they connect to your machine, okay? So check those. Then we have your cylinders. So you will have at least an oxygen cylinder. Some places you'll have air and nitrous oxide cylinders in the back of your machine, okay? The cylinders to the regulators. They have regulators, diaphragm valves that read the pressure or the PSI of the tanks. This is considered part of your high pressure system. Okay. And again, this is where I usually start. So you check your pipeline pressures, and then you always, always, always check your backup tanks. Because if something happens, God forbid, and you don't have any oxygen in here, you're going to be scrambling. Okay. So always make sure. And usually they have a little key, you spin it, and then you're usually able to read the PSI in the front of your machine and make sure they are not empty. Cannot stress that enough. It'll save your little butt. Okay. Never skip that step. Never skip that step when you're doing that. Okay. So this is part of the back machine, and little side thing, you should always make sure that you have an ambu bag should be back there as well. Because I had a situation the other day where I had an issue with my machine, wasn't getting an oxygen flow, and I basically had to ambu the patient, grab a cylinder, like just a cylinder off like a stretcher, connect an ambu to that, and bag the patient. Okay. So always make sure, because if the machine is leaking per se too, it's not going to matter if those tanks are full, but you always want to make sure they're full. Always have a backup plan. If something happens in my machine, how else can I get oxygen in? Okay. If you have oxygen failure from your pipeline, right? it's going to screech so loud. Like you will never unhear that sound again. You will definitely know if there's no oxygen coming from your pipeline. And again, if there's nothing here from the pipeline, it's going to go into your backup tank. So if your pipeline is running low, you can usually crack open your other tanks and use that as well. Okay. The main job of this high pressure system is to prevent cylinder misconnections and prevent leaking of the cylinders into each other when the pipeline is being used. So this is why this is a high pressure system, because we want to make sure that these aren't leaking into each other and we're not having any misconnections. Okay. So again, your high pressure system is the cylinders to the regulators or the diaphragm valves that read the pressure of the PSI in the front. So to these valves that are reading the PSI from these backup tanks or in the front, okay? That's your high pressure system. Now, your intermediate pressure system are the pipelines to the flow meters, okay? So this is your high pressure. The pipelines to the flow meters is your intermediate pressure system. And that also includes your oxygen flush valve, which will be usually a green button in the front there. You can use to kind of refill up that oxygen. Okay. Check for leaks and stuff like that. Your oxygen flush valve delivers oxygen at 35 to 75 mils a minute. Okay. So high pressure, intermediate from the pipeline to the flow meters, which includes your oxygen flush valve. And then the low pressure, there's a low pressure oxygen alarm. It's called the oxygen fail-safe. Okay. The oxygen fail-safe is part of the high pressure system, but it's a low pressure oxygen alarm. Okay. So put this over here with high. So you have your oxygen to write all this. I had to like review all this stuff, guys, right? So your oxygen fail-safe is part of your high pressure system, but it basically goes off when there is a low pressure of oxygen. Okay. And that's going to go off when there's less than 30 PSI of oxygen. And it's usually just due from a depleted tank, especially if you're running a tank in an office or something like that. Or again, depleted, decreased pipeline pressure, something's disconnected. And it is also connected to your nitrous, because you never want to run nitrous oxide without oxygen, because you will fill them up with nothing but nitrous oxide. You will have no oxygen in the body and they will desat very quickly, or no oxygen in the lungs. It's really bad. So it'll automatically shut that off as well. And I'll talk about that more in a second. Okay. So this is kind of your initial check, making sure you got that ambu bag and looking at the back of your machine first. Okay, so now number 2 is the P in our SPDD is processing. So now that we have talked about the high, intermediate, and low pressure systems, right? Now we have to process the gas. We have our supply coming in. Now, what are we going to do with the supply that we have? We have to process the supply, which is done from inside the machine. And this is going to be processing is going to be the low pressure system. Okay, so the low pressure system is from the flow meter tubes to the common gas outlet. Okay, which is basically where everything comes out. And then we have our patient down here. So that is low pressure from the flow meters to the common gas outlet. And this includes your vaporizers. Okay. So this is going to be your low pressure system. SIVO, I feel like, is mostly used. ISO is mostly used for hearts, and DES is being taken away because it's bad for the environment. So a lot of places I work, we just have SIVO. I haven't used DES in a long time. Like I maybe use it here and there, but it's just not available where I'm at. Okay. Another thing to note with flow meters, boards love to ask the questions to where you read the different flow meters at. So if it's like a ball flow meter, you read the flow of oxygen 2, 3, 4, 8, whatever it is, in the middle of the ball. If it's an arrow, you read it at the top of the float. Okay, so just something to pay attention to. I know boards like that. Okay, so going back to the nitrous oxide and the hypoxic guard. Okay, so nitrogen and oxygen are going to be paired up in a machine. Like I said, it's called the hypoxic guard, and it always wants to maintain a 3-to-1 ratio of oxygen and nitrous oxide. Okay. So a 3 oxygens to 1 nitrous oxide. Okay. Because again, if you infuse someone with 100% nitrous oxide, yeah, that would be really, really bad. Like I said, there'd be no oxygen going into that at all. Going into that patient at all, you completely would deplete them quickly. So they are paired up in the machine. Okay, Other parts of this low pressure system when we're talking about processing is your oxygen concentration analyzer. So it's different in every machines, but a lot of machines we always had to check those and make sure they weren't loose. Sometimes you like pull it off, put it to air, and then you plug it back in and see. But the oxygen concentration analyzer, you always want to make sure that is reading correctly, right? So we know how much oxygen concentration we're giving. Your APL pop-off valve, that's usually kind of over here. It's a APL valve. It's only used during spontaneous ventilation. When you turn the vent on, that is no longer part of the equation. But it basically allows you to adjust the pressure in the patient circuit. Okay. This is how you would do the Valsalva maneuver for surgeons if they want to check for any bleeding, increase that intrathoracic pressure. And you can also use it to recruit alveoli. You can turn it to like anywhere from 40 to 50, squeeze that bag for a little bit, and then release it. And then it just gives like I said, recruitment of alveoli, and it allows patients sometimes, especially if they're doing like neck surgery and stuff like that, they want to see if you add high pressure, what happens? Do they have any bleeding? Okay, so that's also part of your low pressure system. Then we also have down here, which will be our soda lime. So you have your soda lime absorbers. Make sure you know the equations for those for boards, but those will basically turn purple when they are exhausted. And on your machine, you will see the FiCO2, which should literally be 0 to 2. That will start to creep up. So if your FiCO2 is alarming and it's like 11, 12, it's like up, check your soda lime. They could be exhausted and they will be purple. So usually you pull it out and you put another one back in of fresh soda lime, or CO2 absorbers is another thing for that. Okay. If you're unable to change it during a case, increase your fresh gas flow. So use your flow meters, increase the fresh gas coming in, and this will help prevent that patient rebreathing a lot of that CO2. And again, be mindful of this CO2 absorbers. They have been a source of leak for me. Like they've definitely been a big source of leak. If you cannot figure out a leak, sometimes they're cracked, sometimes they're not sitting in right. So when you've changed your circuit, you've checked everything, don't forget to look at your soda lime, because a lot of times there's been leaks in those as well. And again, this is all part of your low pressure system. And then again, you have your vaporizers, which we talked about. They take liquid anesthetic, they convert it into a vapor. Obviously, I could do literally I think I have a masterclass of that in my coaching program. We could do a whole video just on that. But they basically work via your GABA A receptor to keep your patient sleepy. Okay. So that's processing. And a lot of the processing, like I said, is the low pressure system. And those are all the pieces of that. And again, the big clinical pieces of that is before you get started is obviously leak checks, checking for any leaks, and making sure your gases are filled and ready for the day. Fill those bad boys up. All right, so we have supplied our machine with the goods. We have processed them, right? We have done all the processing. Now we have to, step 3, deliver. Now we need to deliver all the goods to our patient, okay? And this is essentially your breathing circuits that you connect to your machine and that connect to your patient if you're masking them, if you've tubed them, if you LMA'd them, whatever it may be, okay? And these are categorized. I did do another video on these circuits, the open to semi-open to semi-closed to close. I have a whole video on that, so I will link that as well, so you guys can watch that. But these are your basically your circuit systems that you use. What we use daily, what this is essentially a semi-closed or a circle system, okay? When we're doing MAC anesthesia and we have the patient hooked up to the auxiliary, because there's usually an auxiliary oxygen hookup here with a face mask or nasal cannula, that is more of an open system. Okay. And again, I just can't say this enough, especially because I work solo a lot using different machines. But if you're experiencing any circuit leaks, the first thing you want to do is check, did anything disconnect? You have expiratory and inspiratory limbs that you hook your circuit up to. Is anything disconnected there? Is anything, did it disconnected from the patient? That's happened before under the drape. So the surgeons are like, I can smell gas. I'm like, oh no. I talked about the CO2 absorbers. If there's any issues with your bag valve or vent switching from spontaneous ventilation, where you can use the APL valve, or switching to the vent. Sometimes actually what houses the bellows with the vents, depending on the machine, that can be loose or crooked. That's happened. You could just have leaks in your circuit. I mean, the circuits could get scratched or something like that. Moisture building up in the flow sensors, any of those things. So just all those things to think about. Take a deep breath, stay calm, and try to find the source of whatever the leak is. And remember, that's why you always want to have an ambu bag, because you always want to be in another source of oxygen just in case something happens with your machine. And then you just keep calm and you kind of work patient, and then you kind of work back checking things. Okay. Now, if there's high pressure issues, a lot of times is the patient bronchospasming? Are they biting? Always try to go back to manual and see how it feels to ventilate them. If they're fine, if you're ventilating them, you're like, what is going on? It could be the vent. The ventilator spill valve may have failed. Is a scavenger occluded? Maybe the positive pressure relief valve on the scavenger, any of those things. So think about, is there plastic wrap still left on the CO2 absorber or on the mask? That's happened before. PEEP valve malfunction, anything like that. So always, again, like anything else, look at your patient first. I ask that in my mock interviews all the time. High pressure alarm, your vented patient, what do you do? And go, right? Look at your patient. What are they satting? What is their color? Are they biting? Is anything? And look over the drapes. What is happening over the drapes? And then kind of trace it back. Okay. And then you always want to get a feel of bagging them to see if there's something else going on. Okay. Okay. Very quickly, last is just our disposal of gases. Not too much to say here. Every system, they'll be a little bit different. When I was giving anesthesia on a mission trip in Africa, we had a hose and we just put the hose out the window. The gases went out the window. We do have, scavenging systems, disposal systems here. Sometimes you have to turn a little knob to make sure it's okay, but it's usually like underneath the machine. You'll see the scavenging system, because what goes in has to come out. And so basically disposal of those gases is kind of like the last piece of that. Not really much for us to do with that. Okay. Okay. I hope that was a nice, like I said, I'm all about the big picture view. And then now you can kind of like, okay, I get the big picture. Now I can go in and review the regulators and cylinders and all those fancy things that are in there, right? Because I understand that that's part of that high pressure system and I get why, right? Because we make sure nothing is spilling into the other. Looking at your flow meters more closely, understanding your gases, just take it piece by piece. Like you have the big picture now. Now you can break it down and look at the nitty gritty stuff. I always say that. What is it? Zoom out and then zoom in, and it's going to be less overwhelming for you. Okay. All right. I wish you guys the best of luck. I hope that was helpful. If there's anything else you want to see, comment below, shoot me an email or a message or anything like that. I am here to help y'all. And this is going to click and fall into place. I promise you. I didn't even talk about the vent. I have a vent class too. So I will link all those other goodies below so you can keep on learning and keep on delivering excellent patient care. All right. Have a great one, y'all.